Colcio didn't touch a woman his whole life, until he hires his black virgin surrogate to cook. The word escaped before his brain approved it. She stopped, looking back with eyes that held more hope than he'd seen in years. What's that one meal that takes you straight back to feeling loved? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The billionaire who never touched a woman was found on his knees in a kitchen, begging her not to leave, while corporate executives watched through hidden cameras, documenting every vulnerable moment. Because she wasn't just his cook, she was his unwitting test subject in an empathy experiment he never knew existed. What happens when the coldest man alive discovers he's been living a lie? Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they were studying you like a lab rat? Have you ever fallen for someone who was paid to be near you? This is about manipulation disguised as love, about power that destroys the very thing it claims to protect. But what if the experiment backfired? What if the observer became the observed, and the hunter became the hunted? Drop a comment if you've ever wondered whether someone's feelings for you are real, and follow along as we expose a love story that started as corporate espionage. Let me take you back to the moment when Nathan Bellamy's perfectly controlled world met a woman who would shatter it completely. He built walls so high that even his own reflection couldn't reach him. Until the day a church girl from South Carolina walked into his kitchen and set his entire world on fire. The Buckhead mansion gleamed like a mausoleum of success. Marble floors echoed every footstep. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed everything while hiding the man inside. Nathan Bellamy had designed it that way. Transparent yet impenetrable, just like his reputation in Atlanta's tech world. At 34, he'd never kissed a woman, never held hands, never allowed anyone close enough to see the cracks in his perfect facade. His mother died in prison when he was 7. Foster care taught him that attachment meant abandonment. Control meant survival. The classified ad was simple: private live-in cook needed. No prior culinary training required. Absolute discretion expected. What walked through his door wasn't what he'd ordered. Zariah Davis stood barely 5'4" in his grand foyer, clutching a worn Bible and a folder of recommendation letters from her church. Dark skin glowed against a modest yellow dress that had seen better years, but still carried dignity like designer silk. Her smile was genuine, dangerously, devastatingly genuine. "Mr. Bellamy, I'm here about the surrogate cooking position." Nathan's coffee mug paused halfway to his lips. Surrogate what? The internship? For learning to cook for expectant mothers? Her voice carried South Carolina honey and confusion in equal measure. The ad mentioned discretion, so I assumed. "You misread the posting." His words came out sharper than intended. "This is a private chef position. Live in. Just cooking. Nothing else." Color flooded her cheeks. "Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry. I'll just..." She turned toward the door, and something in Nathan's chest twisted. Maybe it was her embarrassment. Maybe it was how she'd apologized for his rudeness. Maybe it was the way sunlight caught her face and made his sterile home look alive for exactly 3 seconds. Wait, the word escaped before his brain approved it. She stopped, looking back with eyes that held more hope than he'd seen in years. "Can you cook?" "Yes, sir. Been cooking for my grandmother since I was 12. Nothing fancy, just food that makes people feel loved. Food that makes people feel loved." The phrase hung in his climate-controlled air, like something foreign and dangerous. "The position pays well, room and board included, but I value privacy above everything. No friends visiting, no personal calls during work hours, no questions about my business." "I understand completely, sir." "Nathan, just Nathan." Her smile returned, softer this time. "Thank you, Nathan. I am Zariah." When she said his name, it sounded different, warmer, like it belonged to someone who deserved kindness instead of fear. That evening, aromas filled his house that had nothing to do with his usual meal delivery service. Garlic and herbs danced through rooms that had only known silence. His kitchen, a showpiece he'd never actually used, came alive under her hands. She hummed while she worked. Actually hummed. In his fortress of quiet, She brought music without asking permission. Nathan stood in the doorway, watching her move with unconscious grace around his space. When she reached past him for a spice, her arm brushed his chest. The contact lasted maybe 2 seconds. His body's reaction lasted considerably longer. "Sorry," she whispered, stepping back with that same blush painting her cheeks. "It's fine," he managed, though nothing about this felt fine. Nothing about her felt controllable. Have you ever met someone who made you question everything about yourself in the first 5 minutes? Someone whose presence felt like sunlight after years in a cave? Tell me about that moment. Dinner was fried chicken that somehow tasted like childhood memories he'd never had. Mac and cheese that made his chest tight with emotions he couldn't name. Cornbread that crumbled like his resolve with every bite. "This is incredible," he said, meaning it more than he'd meant anything in years. "Thank you. Food is love made visible," my grandmother always says. Love made visible. Nathan stared at his plate, at this woman who'd turned nutrients into something that felt dangerously close to care. As she hummed while chopping vegetables, actually hummed in his silent fortress, Nathan felt something crack inside his chest. He didn't know that across town, corporate executives were already reviewing footage of his first genuine smile in 15 years. She turned his sterile kitchen into a sanctuary. But he was about to discover that some prayers are answered in ways that destroy you. Morning light streamed through kitchen windows as Zariah worked magic with ingredients Nathan had never bothered to buy. Cast iron sizzled on his professional-grade stove. The smell of bacon and fresh biscuits filled corners that had known only the hum of expensive appliances. For the first time in years, his house smelled like a home. "You're up early," she said without turning around, somehow sensing his presence in the doorway. "I don't sleep much." He poured coffee from a pot she'd already prepared. Perfectly strong, no sugar. Exactly how he liked it, though he'd never told her his preference. Troubled mind or troubled conscience? The question came out gentle, not prying. Both, probably. She glanced over her shoulder with those understanding eyes. "My grandmother says the Lord gives his hardest battles to his strongest soldiers." Nathan had stopped believing in God around the same time his mother got arrested for drug possession. What if you're not strong? What if you're just good at pretending? Then you fake it until you make it, and trust that someone upstairs is keeping score of your efforts. She set a plate in front of him, fluffy biscuits, perfectly crispy bacon, eggs that looked like sunshine. Simple food that somehow felt like forgiveness. "Tell me about your grandmother," he said, surprising himself with the personal question. Zariah's face lit up like Christmas morning. Viola Davis, not the actress, just the strongest woman in Greenville. Raised 6 kids after her husband died in Vietnam. Worked 3 jobs to keep us all fed. Never missed church, never raised her voice, never let anybody leave her table hungry. She sounds remarkable. She was. The diabetes is winning now, but she's still fighting. That's why I'm here, actually. Medical bills don't pay themselves. Something twisted in Nathan's chest, part admiration, part protective fury at a world that forced women like Zariah to work for strangers to save the people they loved. "The experimental treatments are expensive," she continued, stirring gravy with movements that looked like meditation. "Insurance calls them unnecessary, but I call them hope." Nathan made a mental note to research diabetes treatments and insurance policies, and perhaps ways to make medical bills disappear without anyone knowing who paid them. "You have faith," he observed. "I have to. Faith is hope with its Sunday shoes on. When everything else fails, you dress up your hope and take it to church." Steam rose from cast iron like incense. Her words settled into places in his chest that had been empty so long he'd forgotten they existed. "I haven't been inside a church since I was 7 years old. That's okay. Churches are just buildings. God meets you wherever you are." She said it so simply, like divine intervention was as common as grocery shopping. Like grace was something you could find in kitchen conversations with a man who'd spent decades running from anything resembling salvation. "Food is love made visible," she said, echoing yesterday's phrase. But love isn't just about feeding bodies. Sometimes it's about feeding souls that forgot they were hungry. Nathan looked at his plate, at this woman who somehow saw starvation he'd hidden from everyone, including himself, and realized he was in serious trouble. When she leaned across the island to refill his coffee, her fingers brushed his hand. The contact shot electricity up his arm and straight to parts of his anatomy that had been dormant for years. She must have felt it too, because her breath caught, and for a moment they stayed frozen, her dark fingers against his pale skin, both of them discovering what one felt like when it wasn't theoretical. "Nathan," she whispered, and his name on her lips sounded like a prayer he didn't know he needed to hear. "What's that one meal that takes you straight back to feeling loved? That dish that tastes like home no matter where you are? Share your comfort food memory." That night, Nathan did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He went back for seconds and thirds, not because he was hungry for food, but because watching her smile when he complimented her cooking felt like the first real thing that had happened to him since childhood. But in a surveillance room downtown, analysts noted the anomaly. Subjects showing unprecedented emotional response. Phase 2 approved. He'd spent his entire life following rules that kept him safe. Until the night he found her crying and threw his whole playbook out the window. 3 days of domestic bliss shattered at 11:47 p.m. when Nathan found Zariah sobbing over her phone in his kitchen. She sat on the floor beside the island, back against custom cabinets, tears streaming down her face like her world was ending. The sight hit him harder than any corporate merger gone wrong, any stock market crash, any board meeting ambush he'd ever survived. "Zariah," he stood frozen in the doorway, every instinct screaming at him to retreat. Emotional women were dangerous territory. Crying meant complications. Complications meant chaos. But she looked so small there on his marble floor, clutching her phone like it held her heart, and something fundamental shifted in his chest. "I'm sorry," she choked out, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I'll just stay." The word came out rougher than he intended. "What happened?" "Grandmother's in the hospital. Diabetic coma. They're saying..." Her voice broke completely. "They're saying if we can't afford the specialized treatment, we should consider comfort care options." Comfort care. Nathan's blood turned to ice. Corporate speak for giving up, for letting someone die because money mattered more than miracles. How much? The question escaped before his brain engaged. "Too much. More than I could make in 5 years doing this job." She laughed bitterly. "I thought I was saving her by coming here. Turns out I was just watching her die from a distance." Nathan's chest felt like someone was squeezing his heart with titanium claws. This woman who brought light into his darkness, who made his house feel like a home, who smiled at him like he deserved kindness. She was breaking apart while he stood there with enough money to solve her problem 100 times over. Every rule he'd lived by screamed warnings. Don't get involved. Don't cross professional boundaries. Don't let anyone need you, because needing leads to leaving, and leaving leads to... She looked up at him with eyes that held more pain than anyone should carry, and his rules combusted. Nathan dropped to his knees beside her on the cold marble floor. "It's going to be okay." Moonlight streamed through kitchen windows, turning her tears into silver tracks down dark skin. In that moment, she looked less like hired help and more like the missing piece of his incomplete puzzle. "You don't understand," she whispered. "She's all I have. She raised me when my parents couldn't. She taught me how to cook, how to pray, how to believe that good things happen to good people. If I lose her, you won't." His hand moved without permission, covering hers on the marble floor. Skin-to-skin contact sent electricity racing up his arm. But for once the sensation felt like connection instead of danger. "I promise you won't lose her." "Nathan, you can't promise that." "I can, and I am." Her eyes searched his face like she was looking for lies, for the catch, for the moment when his kindness would reveal its price tag. But Nathan had never been more serious about anything in his entire life. When was the last time someone surprised you by caring when you least expected it? When has a stranger become safety in your darkest moment? Drop a heart if you felt that unexpected kindness. He pulled out his phone. Not his business phone, but his personal cell that exactly 4 people had the number to. Dr. Martinez? This is Nathan Bellamy. I need you to call Greenville Memorial Hospital immediately. There's a patient named Viola Davis who requires immediate specialized diabetic treatment. Yes, experimental protocols if necessary. Cost is irrelevant. Bill everything to my personal account. Zariah stared at him like he'd just performed a miracle in her kitchen. You can't, she breathed. That's too much. I can't accept. You're not accepting anything. I'm making a business decision. My employee's grandmother needs medical care. I'm ensuring my employee can focus on her job instead of family emergencies. It was a lie wrapped in logic, and they both knew it. This had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the way her smile had made his house feel like home for the first time in decades. As he handed her his personal phone with his private doctor's number, Nathan crossed a line he'd drawn in permanent ink. But 3 floors above them, hidden cameras captured every gesture, every word, every crack in the Ice King's armor. The experiment was exceeding all projections. She brought him coffee at 3 a.m. and found him staring at financial records. Not his company's profits, but her grandmother's medical bills. Nathan's home office glowed with blue monitor light at 3 in the morning. Medical invoices spread across mahogany like evidence of suffering he was determined to solve. Insurance denials, treatment costs, payment plans that would keep Zariah in debt until she was 60. Numbers he could fix, problems money could eliminate. But every solution felt like crossing boundaries she'd probably never forgive him for crossing. Nathan, her voice came soft from the doorway. You're up late. He minimized the screen, but not fast enough. She'd already seen her grandmother's name across multiple browser tabs. Couldn't sleep. He accepted the coffee mug she offered, their fingers brushing in the exchange. Even exhausted and worried, her touch sent heat racing through his system. Those are grandmother's bills. Not a question. An observation delivered in that gentle way that somehow made his invasion of her privacy sound less criminal. I was curious about treatment options. Nathan. She moved around his desk, close enough that her perfume mixed with coffee steam. Close enough that he could see flecks of gold in her brown eyes. You've already done more than enough. Have I? He swiveled his chair to face her fully. Because from where I'm sitting, I've done the bare minimum while you're working yourself to exhaustion for someone else's survival. That's what family does. What if you had other options? Such as, the question hung between them like a bridge neither was ready to cross. Nathan had spent 3 days researching not just her grandmother's condition, but Zariah's entire financial situation. Student loans from a teaching degree she'd never used. Credit cards maxed out on medical expenses. A mortgage on a house she'd inherited that needed repairs she couldn't afford. He could solve all of it with a phone call. Wipe her debts clean. Set up trust funds. Ensure she never had to choose between dignity and desperation again. But doing so would reveal exactly how deep his interest in her personal life had become. And that was territory neither of them was prepared to navigate. I could increase your salary, he offered carefully. I'm not your charity case. The words came out sharper than usual, surprising them both. I know you're not. Do you? Because it feels like you're trying to solve my problems with your checkbook, and that's not what I signed up for. She moved toward the window, putting distance between them that felt like punishment. Her reflection in the glass looked small and stubborn and beautiful in ways that made his chest ache. What did you sign up for? The question escaped before he could stop it. A job, cooking, keeping house, earning honest money to take care of the woman who raised me. She turned back to face him. Not becoming someone's project. You're not a project. Nathan stood, drawn toward her like gravity had shifted. You're everything. The words sat in his throat, too big and too true to voice. I'm what? He stopped just close enough to catch her scent, to see the way her breath quickened when he invaded her personal space. Close enough to touch, if he dared. You're making this very complicated. This?
Everything. My routine. My rules. My complete inability to focus on anything except the way you hum while you cook. Color flooded her cheeks. Nathan, I think about you. The confession tumbled out rough and honest. I think about your smile, your voice, the way you make my house feel like something other than a mausoleum. And that's dangerous for both of us. Why dangerous? Because I don't know how to love people without destroying them. Because everyone I've ever cared about has left. Because you deserve better than a man who spent 34 years building walls to keep the world out. Because I'm not good at this, he said instead. At what? Caring about someone. The admission hung between them like a confession. Zariah stepped closer, close enough that he could see individual eyelashes, close enough that her warmth battled the air conditioning for control of his office atmosphere. Maybe you're better at it than you think. Have you ever had someone care so much they crossed boundaries you didn't know you needed? Someone who saw your pain before you showed it? Tell me about protective love in the comments. When she started to leave his office, his voice stopped her at the doorway. Stay. One word that hung between them like a bridge neither was ready to cross. But the corporate surveillance team was already scheduling Phase 3, direct emotional manipulation. She was teaching him to cook when he realized the only recipe he wanted to learn was how to touch her without breaking everything. Saturday morning transformed Nathan's showpiece kitchen into something resembling actual life. Flour dusted every surface. Mixing bowls crowded the island. Zariah moved through his space like she'd been born there, turning ingredients into magic while he watched from what he assumed was a safe distance. You can't learn to cook by observation, she said without turning around. Come here. Nathan approached cautiously. He'd navigated hostile corporate takeovers with more confidence than he felt walking across his own kitchen toward a woman who'd been invading his thoughts for days. We're making bread, she announced, gesturing to a mound of dough that looked suspiciously alive. Grandmother's recipe. It requires actual hands, not just money. The comment stung because it was accurate. He'd been trying to solve her problems with his wallet instead of his presence. But presence required vulnerability, and vulnerability required trust he'd spent decades learning not to give. I don't cook. Today you do. She dusted her hands with flour, leaving white fingerprints on her dark skin. Step behind me. Every alarm in Nathan's system activated. Behind her meant close contact. Close contact meant losing control. Losing control meant Nathan. Her voice held gentle authority. Trust me. He moved behind her, close enough that her hair tickled his chin, close enough that her warmth seeped through his shirt. When she reached for the rolling pin, her back pressed against his chest, and his body's reaction was immediate and mortifying. Place your hands over mine. Flour dusted her dark hands like starlight as she guided his fingers through bread dough. Their bodies aligned in a dance neither had choreographed, but both understood. Feel that, she whispered. The dough tells you when it's ready. Too much pressure and you'll make it tough. Too little and it won't hold together. Nathan felt nothing but the warmth of her skin beneath his palms and the way her voice vibrated against his chest when she spoke. This wasn't about bread. This was about trust and touch and the dangerous territory between wanting and having. You're not paying attention, she accused, laughter threading through her voice. I'm paying attention to everything. To the dough. To you. The admission slipped out honest and rough. Zariah went still in his arms, their hands frozen on the rolling pin, flour suspended between them like snow. Nathan, I know this complicates things. It doesn't have to. She turned in the circle of his arms, close enough that flour smudged her cheek, close enough that he could count individual eyelashes. When flour marked her skin, his thumb traced it away with reverence that made her breath catch. This is a bad idea, he whispered, but his hands had moved to frame her face like she was something precious he was afraid to break. Probably. I don't know how to do this without ruining it. Do what? Want someone. The confession hung between them loaded with years of isolation and fear. Zariah's eyes searched his face like she was reading a story written in his expressions. Then let me teach you. She rose on her toes, closing the distance between them with certainty that made his chest tight. Her lips brushed his. Soft, questioning, offering instead of demanding. Nathan had never kissed anyone. Never wanted to until this moment when wanting felt like drowning and breathing simultaneously. The kitchen timer chose that moment to shatter their almost kiss with aggressive beeping. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers, flour clouds settling between them like evidence of interrupted desire. "Biscuits," Zariah breathed, moving toward the oven with shaking hands. "Right, biscuits." But Nathan wasn't thinking about bread. He was thinking about the way her lips had felt against his for exactly 3 seconds, and how those 3 seconds had rewritten every rule he'd lived by. What's more intimate? Someone cooking for you or someone teaching you to cook? When has a simple touch felt like the most dangerous thing in the world? Share your thoughts. As they stood frozen in almost kiss position, his phone buzzed with a message that made his blood run cold. Emotional attachment levels optimal. Initiating romantic catalyst protocols. Someone was orchestrating this. Someone was watching them fall. The morning he woke up wanting her was the same morning corporate executives decided she was working too slowly. Nathan's alarm clock read 6:47 a.m., but he'd been awake since 4, staring at his ceiling and thinking about flour-dusted fingers and almost kisses that felt more real than anything in his carefully constructed life. Downstairs, coffee was already brewing. The smell of bacon drifted through his house like a promise of normalcy. But nothing felt normal anymore. Not when every breath reminded him of how close they'd come to crossing lines that would change everything. "Morning," Zariah said when he appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her smile looked careful, like she was testing whether yesterday's moment had ruined their careful balance. "Morning." He poured coffee, noting how she'd placed his mug exactly where he liked it. How she'd remembered he preferred toast lightly browned. How she'd learned his patterns without him teaching them. The morning news played on the kitchen screen. Stock reports, weather, traffic, background noise, until a photo flashed that made Nathan's blood freeze. There they were. Yesterday, in his kitchen, her hands guiding his on the rolling pin, flour in her hair, his arms around her from behind. The image looked intimate, domestic, like a couple instead of employer and employee. Tech billionaire's mystery woman scrolled across the bottom of the screen. "Oh my God," Zariah's coffee mug clattered against the marble counter. "Nathan, I'm so sorry. I didn't know anyone was watching. I didn't. This isn't your fault." But Nathan's mind was racing. His house was supposed to be private, secure. No paparazzi had ever gotten close enough for photos like this. His phone buzzed. Board meeting. Emergency session. Immediate attendance required. "I have to go," he said, grabbing his keys with hands that shook with rage instead of fear. Should I leave?" Zariah's voice came out small, uncertain. The question hit him like a physical blow. Leave? Of course she'd think about leaving. Everyone always left when his world got complicated. "No." The word came out sharper than he intended. "Don't go anywhere. Don't answer the door. Don't talk to anyone. I'll handle this." But as he drove toward downtown Atlanta, Nathan realized he had no idea how to handle falling for someone while his entire life was under a microscope he hadn't known existed. The boardroom felt like a tribunal. 12 suits around polished wood, all staring at him like he'd committed corporate treason by showing human emotion in his own kitchen. "Nathan," Chairman Morrison began, sliding a tablet across the table. "We need to discuss these photos. More images, different angles." Him touching her hand in the hospital corridor, her crying in his kitchen while he knelt beside her. Moments he'd thought were private, now displayed like evidence in a case he didn't understand. "How did you get these?" That's not the issue. The issue is your relationship with hired help creating liability concerns. "She's my employee, nothing more." These photos suggest otherwise. Board member Williams leaned forward like a vulture, scenting weakness. "The company's reputation. My personal life is not company business. When your personal life affects stock prices, it becomes our business. The shareholders are concerned about your judgment." Nathan's jaw clenched. "My judgment built this company. My judgment made you all rich. Your judgment also involves getting emotionally attached to domestic staff. What's next, Nathan? Are you going to marry the help?" The insult hung in the air like poison gas. Nathan's hands curled into fists under the table, every muscle in his body coiling for violence. "Careful, Morrison. You're talking about someone who matters to me. That's exactly the problem. Have you ever been afraid that loving someone would destroy them? When has fear of hurting someone become fear of feeling anything at all? Tell me about protective distance. The meeting dissolved into threats disguised as concern, demands wrapped in corporate speak. By the time Nathan returned home, afternoon shadows stretched across his foyer like prison bars. He found Zariah in the kitchen, flour gone. No evidence of their morning almost disaster except the tension radiating from her shoulders. "How bad?" she asked without turning around. "Bad enough. I should pack." The words hit him like ice water. "What? This is my fault. I crossed lines. I made things complicated for you." "Fadia, no." She turned to face him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Look at me, Nathan. Really look. I'm a broke girl from South Carolina working as your cook. You're a billionaire. People are going to assume the worst no matter what we do. I don't care what people assume. You should. Your board does. Your company does. I heard the news reports calling me your mystery woman like I'm some kind of scandal waiting to happen." Nathan crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, stopping close enough to see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, close enough to catch her scent beneath the lingering smell of whatever she'd been cooking. "You want to know what you are to me? Nathan, you're the first person in 15 years who's made me want to come home instead of avoiding it. You're the reason I bought groceries for the first time in my adult life. You're the woman who taught me that food can taste like love, that kitchens can feel like sanctuaries, that maybe I'm not as broken as I thought." Color flooded her cheeks. "You don't understand the position this puts me in." "Then explain it to me." Every woman in your life becomes a gold digger in the public eye. Every relationship becomes a transaction. Every feeling becomes suspect. Her voice cracked. "I can't be the woman who brought down Nathan Bellamy because she forgot her place." When she cupped his face and whispered, "Then don't touch me with your hands. Touch me with your heart." Nathan's last defense crumbled. But in surveillance headquarters, alarms were going off. Subject developing genuine attachment. Prepare for emotional extraction. The night she gave him her virginity was the same night he discovered she wasn't supposed to be real. Nathan's bedroom had always been a place for sleeping, nothing more. Neutral colors, expensive furniture, zero personality. But when Zariah crossed the threshold at midnight, it transformed into something that felt sacred and dangerous in equal measure. "Are you sure?" he asked for the 4th time, watching her move through his space with quiet determination. "I've been sure since the moment you knelt on your kitchen floor, because I was crying." She turned to face him, moonlight painting her skin silver against the darkness. "I've never been more sure of anything." Nathan had researched this moment obsessively. Read articles, studied techniques, worried about mechanics and performance and all the technical aspects of something that should have been instinctive. But when Zariah reached for the buttons of her dress, all his research became irrelevant. This wasn't about technique. This was about trust. "I don't want to hurt you." "You won't." She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the certainty in her eyes. "I trust you." Those 3 words undid him completely. Trust wasn't something Nathan inspired in people. Fear, respect, intimidation, those he understood. But trust was foreign territory. "I've never," he started. "I know." Her fingers found the buttons of his shirt, working them loose with steady hands. "Neither have I. We'll figure it out together." His bedroom transformed from sterile space to sacred ground as she offered herself not as sacrifice, but as gift, moonlight painting her skin silver against dark sheets. When she guided his hands with quiet confidence born of choice, not pressure, Nathan realized he'd spent 34 years existing instead of living. "I want this," she breathed against his mouth. "I want you." For the first time in his life, Nathan believed in something beyond code and calculations. Her skin was silk and warmth beneath his palms. Every touch drew sounds from her throat that rewrote his understanding of human connection. When she arched beneath him, when she whispered his name like a prayer, Nathan understood why people wrote poetry about moments like this. "Are you okay?" he whispered against her neck, tasting salt and sweetness. "More than okay," she managed, fingers digging into his shoulders. "Don't stop." He couldn't. Not when she was looking at him like he was something precious instead of something to fear. Not when every movement brought them closer to something that felt like completion. When she cried out his name at the peak, when her body tightened around his and pulled him over the edge with her, Nathan experienced something he'd only read about in books. The feeling of being exactly where he belonged. Afterward, they lay tangled in sheets that smelled like sweat and satisfaction, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. That was... She started. Perfect, he finished. I was going to say better than I imagined, but perfect works too. Nathan's chest rumbled with something that might have been laughter. You imagine this. Color flooded her cheeks, even in the darkness. Maybe, once or twice, or every night since I met you. Good. Because I've been imagining it constantly, and I was starting to worry I was losing my mind. She propped herself up on his chest, hair falling around her face like a curtain. What happens now? Now you stay. Now we figure out how to make this work despite everyone who wants to tear us apart. Now we... His words died as his fingers found something that shouldn't exist. A tiny lens, barely visible, embedded in his headboard. Hidden so well he'd never noticed it before, but now, with heightened awareness that came from happiness, it stood out like a neon sign. What is it? Zoraya followed his gaze, then sucked in a sharp breath. Is that? Akamira. His voice came out flat, deadly calm. Someone's been watching us. The implications hit them simultaneously. Every moment, every conversation, every private touch had been recorded, analyzed, studied by people whose names he didn't even know. Nathan. Zoraya's voice shook as the full scope of violations sank in. Get dressed. He was already moving, pulling on clothes with mechanical precision. We need to talk, but not here. Not where they can hear us. What would you do if you discovered the most real thing in your life was someone else's experiment? When is love stronger than the lies that created it? Share your thoughts below. As they dressed in charged silence, Nathan's mind worked through possibilities, connections, corporate chess moves he should have seen coming. Someone had played him, used Zoraya as a weapon against his heart. But they'd made one critical error. They'd given him something worth fighting for. We need to search this entire house, he said, voice carrying a rage that could burn down corporations. As they lay, tangled in aftermath, Nathan's fingers found the tiny camera lens hidden in the headboard. We need to talk, he said, but his voice held a rage that could burn down corporations. The experiment was about to become a war. She thought he was pulling away because of what they'd shared, until she learned he was planning to destroy everyone who'd used her as a weapon against his heart. Nathan's home office became a war room at 3 in the morning. Multiple monitors blazed with corporate communications, financial records, legal documents. He'd traded silk pajamas for armor disguised as a business suit, and the transformation terrified Zoraya more than the cameras had. 14 surveillance devices, he said without looking up from his screens. Kitchen, living room, bedroom, study. They've been watching us since day one. Zoraya sat curled in the leather chair across from his desk, wearing one of his shirts over her clothes like protection against the violation she felt crawling under her skin. Who's they? People who thought they could use you to manipulate me. His fingers flew across keyboards with surgical precision. People who are about to learn the difference between Nathan Bellamy, the CEO, and Nathan Bellamy, when someone threatens what's his. I'm not property. No. He finally looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her stomach flip. You're so much more valuable than that. You're the woman who taught me how to feel human again. And they used that against both of us. Email chains filled his screens, corporate communications dating back months. References to emotional integration protocols and empathy experiments and subject ends attachment responses. They've been planning this since before I posted the job listing, Nathan continued, voice getting colder with each discovery. The ad was specifically designed to attract women from your demographic. Church background, financial pressure, caretaker personality. They wanted someone who would trigger my protective instincts. So everything we felt, Zoraya's voice came out smaller than she intended, was real. He abandoned his keyboard to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. What we have is real. but they created the circumstances hoping to manipulate us both. Why? Because isolated, emotionless Nathan Bellamy was becoming a liability. Bad for company morale, bad for public relations, bad for stock prices. So they decided to conduct an experiment in forced empathy development. The words hit her like physical blows. I was hired to be your emotional support animal. You were hired to be yourself. They just didn't expect you to be so goddamn perfect at it. Zariah pulled her hands free, wrapping her arms around herself like she could hold the pieces together through willpower alone. This is insane. People don't do things like this. Rich people do things like this all the time. We just usually target each other instead of innocent women from South Carolina. What happens now? Nathan's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Now I remind them why nobody messes with my personal life. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of legal documents, phone calls, and strategic moves that felt like watching a master chess player demolish opponents who'd thought they were playing checkers. Nathan's lawyer arrived at dawn. His accountant followed at 7. By 8 a.m., his dining room looked like a legal war zone, and Zariah understood why people feared crossing Nathan Bellamy in business. Breach of privacy, illegal surveillance, emotional manipulation, fraud. His lawyer rattled off charges like a grocery list. We have enough evidence to destroy everyone involved. I don't want them destroyed, Nathan said, surprising everyone in the room. I want them educated. There's a difference. What do you mean? I mean, we're going to use their own experiment against them. They wanted to study empathy development? Let's give them a real-time case study in what happens when you use love as a weapon. Zariah watched him orchestrate corporate warfare from across the room, and despite everything that had happened, despite the violation and manipulation, she felt something dangerous growing in her chest. Bride. He was fighting for her, for them, for the right to choose their own feelings instead of having them manufactured by corporate committee. Zariah. His voice cut through her thoughts. I need you to make a choice. What kind of choice? Stay and fight with me, or walk away and let me handle this alone. Either way, I'll make sure they never hurt you again. But if you stay, if you stay, we're going to war. Public scrutiny, media attention, legal battles that could drag on for months. It won't be easy. Have you ever discovered you were a pawn in someone else's game? How do you reclaim your power when everything you thought was real was manufactured? Tell me about fighting back. Zariah stood up from her chair, walked across the room, and kissed him in front of his entire legal team. I grew up in South Carolina, she said against his mouth. We don't run from fights. We finish them. When she kissed him with fierce determination and whispered, burn it all down, Nathan smiled for the second time in his life. But this smile was different. This smile had teeth. The Ice King was about to become a dragon. She walked into the corporate boardroom not as the naive church girl they'd manipulated, but as the woman who'd taught a billionaire how to feel. And now she was about to teach them the cost of using love as a weapon. The glass boardroom on the 42nd floor of Bellamy Industries reflected nothing but power and privilege until Zariah entered wearing a silk dress that Nathan had bought her and confidence she'd earned herself. 12 men in expensive suits turned to stare at the woman they'd reduced to a variable in their equation. What they saw wasn't what they'd expected. Gone was the shy cook in secondhand clothes. In her place stood someone who discovered her own worth through being valued, someone who'd learned strength through being protected, someone who'd found her voice through being heard. Gentlemen, Nathan said, his hand on the small of her back, not to guide her, but to ground himself. I'd like you to meet Zariah Davis, the woman you've been illegally surveilling for the past 3 months. Chairman Morrison's face went pale. Nathan, this is highly irregular. Board meetings are for making decisions that affect company direction, Zariah interrupted, her voice carrying Southern steel wrapped in honey. I'd say illegally experimenting on your CEO affects company direction, wouldn't you? The room fell silent except for the software of air conditioning and the distant hum of Atlanta traffic 42 floors below. Ms. Davis, board member Williams cleared his throat. I think there's been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. She moved to the head of the conference table with the grace of someone who'd learned that power wasn't about volume. It was about certainty. Y'all thought you could manipulate a lonely man's emotions by dangling a vulnerable woman in front of him like bait. Y'all thought you could play puppet master with people's hearts and call it corporate strategy. That's not. That's exactly what you did. You reduced me to a character in your experiment. You turned Nathan's isolation into a business problem to be solved. You treated human emotions like stock options to be manipulated for profit. Nathan watched from beside the floor-to-ceiling windows, and despite the circumstances, despite the anger and violation, he felt something that might have been pride. This was his woman. This was the person who'd taught him that strength came in different packages, that power could be gentle, that love could be revolutionary. What you didn't count on, Zariah continued, was that real emotions don't follow corporate timelines. Real love doesn't respond to market research. And real people don't appreciate being treated like lab rats in your empathy experiment. Ms. Davis, we understand you're upset. Upset. Her laugh could have frozen hell. Honey, upset is when your coffee gets cold. What I am is educated. See, Nathan spent all morning teaching me about securities fraud, privacy violations, and emotional manipulation statutes. Turns out, using people's hearts as corporate tools is illegal in several different ways. The legal documents hit the conference table like thunder. You have 48 hours to resign, Nathan said quietly. All of you. Full severance packages, glowing recommendations, graceful exits. Or we go public with everything. You can't be serious, Morrison sputtered. Deadly serious. You want to study empathy development? Let me give you a real-time case study. I've learned that I'm extremely protective of people I love. I've learned that I don't negotiate when someone threatens my family. And I've learned that I have more money, better lawyers, and fewer ethics than any of you when it comes to protecting what's mine. This is corporate suicide, Williams hissed. No, Zariah said softly. This is what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness, when you confuse love with liability, and when you think you can play games with people's hearts without consequences. When has someone underestimated you so completely that watching their realization became its own reward? Share a time when you surprised everyone, including yourself. As the board meeting dissolved into chaos and desperate negotiations, Nathan caught Zariah's hand. You realize we just declared war on some very powerful people, he murmured. Good, she replied. I'm tired of being scared. I'm tired of being small. And I'm definitely tired of being anyone's experiment. As the board members filed out with their ultimatum, Morrison paused at the door. You have no idea what you've just started. But Nathan's response was quieter, deadlier. Neither do you. But here's what I know. I've got nothing left to lose and everything to protect. That makes me very dangerous. The war had just begun, but they'd forgotten one crucial detail. They were no longer fighting alone. They tried to tear them apart with corporate espionage, but instead created the most dangerous thing in the business world. Two people with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. 3 weeks after the boardroom confrontation, Nathan's penthouse had transformed into headquarters for a different kind of revolution. Law books scattered between takeout containers, strategy sessions melding into intimate conversations, war planning interrupted by moments of tenderness that reminded them what they were protecting. Stock prices are up 12%, Nathan's new CFO reported during their morning briefing. The board resignations actually improved investor confidence. Apparently, the market likes ethical leadership. Zariah listened from the kitchen where she was preparing breakfast for the legal team that had become their extended family. Fighting corporate warfare required fuel, and she discovered that feeding people was another form of power. What about the media response? She asked, setting coffee in front of lawyers who'd been working 18-hour days to build their case. Mixed, but trending positive. The story is playing as David versus Goliath. Except David is a billionaire and Goliath is corporate corruption. People love it. Nathan caught her eye across the room and smiled. Not the calculated expression he'd worn in business meetings for years, but something genuine that reached his eyes and made her stomach flutter despite everything they'd been through. There's more, his lawyer continued. We've been contacted by 7 other companies. Similar situations. executives who were unknowingly part of empathy experiments, employees who were hired as emotional manipulation tools. This is bigger than we thought. How much bigger? Multi-billion-dollar bigger. We're talking about a consulting firm that's been running psychological experiments on Fortune 500 CEOs for the past 5 years. Your case just cracked it wide open. Soraya set down her coffee mug with shaking hands. 7 other women like me? 7 other situations. Different scenarios, same principle. Vulnerable people hired to emotionally manipulate isolated executives. All of it documented, all of it illegal, all of it about to become very public. The weight of it settled over the room like a storm cloud. This wasn't just about them anymore. This was about systematic abuse disguised as corporate strategy. What do they need from us? Nathan asked. Testimony, leadership, a face for the movement. You two have become symbols of fighting back against corporate manipulation. Soraya looked at Nathan across their makeshift war room, seeing the same realization in his eyes that was burning in her chest. They could walk away now, take their legal victory, and disappear into private happiness. Or they could use their platform to make sure this never happened to anyone else. Schedule the press conference, Nathan said without breaking eye contact with her. Nathan, his lawyer warned, going public means no privacy. Every aspect of your relationship will be scrutinized. Every moment will be analyzed. Are you prepared for that? Are we? Nathan asked her directly. Soraya thought about the shy woman who'd walked into his kitchen 3 months ago, thinking she was applying for a cooking job. That woman would have run. That woman would have hidden. But that woman hadn't learned what it felt like to be valued. Hadn't discovered the power that came from being seen as more than the sum of her circumstances. Hadn't experienced what happened when someone chose to fight the world for your right to exist authentically. I've been hiding my whole life, she said quietly. From poverty, from judgment, from the assumption that I couldn't be more than what people expected. Maybe it's time to stop hiding. When you realize you're not alone in your struggle, everything changes. Have you ever found strength in shared experience? Tell me about finding your tribe in unexpected places. The press conference was scheduled for the following week. By then, their legal team had grown to include prosecutors, FBI investigators, and advocacy groups specializing in corporate abuse cases. The night before they were set to go public, Nathan found Soraya on their penthouse balcony, looking out over Atlanta's skyline like she was memorizing the view. Second thoughts? He asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. No second thoughts, just processing. 6 months ago, I was cooking in my grandmother's kitchen, worried about paying her medical bills. Now I'm about to testify before Congress about corporate psychological manipulation. Regrets. She leaned back against his chest, solid and warm in the cool evening air. Only one. What's that? I wish my grandmother could see this. She always said I was meant for something bigger than I believed. I think she'd be proud. She can see it, Nathan said against her hair. And she is proud. How could she not be? Look what you become. What have I become? Someone who refuses to be a victim. Someone who turns pain into purpose. Someone who fights for people who can't fight for themselves. As their coalition prepared for coordinated legal action against the consulting firm, Nathan's former company made their final play, threatening to expose embarrassing details about Soraya's background unless they backed down. But they'd made a fatal miscalculation. They'd given the Ice King and his Fire Queen a personal reason to burn everything down. When they discovered they weren't the only lab rats in the maze, 2 people in love became the leaders of a revolution that would reshape Silicon Valley forever. The conference room filled with faces that mirrored their own story. Sarah Chun, a marketing executive from San Francisco, sat beside Marcus Rodriguez, a data analyst from Phoenix. Their hands intertwined, just like Nathan and Soraya's. Same pattern, same manipulation, same corporate puppet masters pulling strings. Empathy Solutions Incorporated. Nathan read from the legal documents spread across the mahogany table. They've been running this program for 3 years. 12 cities, 47 couples. Dr. Jennifer Williams, their newly hired investigator, clicked through presentation slides. They target isolated executives with social anxiety disorders. Then they place emotionally intelligent women in their paths. Cooks, housekeepers, personal assistants, always women from vulnerable backgrounds. Zariah's jaw tightened. Women who needed money badly enough to take weird jobs without asking questions. Women they could control, added Rebecca Martinez, a former housekeeper from Dallas whose story made Nathan's blood boil. My boss's company paid my daughter's cancer treatments while I fell in love with him. When I found out it was fake, they threatened to stop the payments. Marcus leaned forward. But here's what they didn't expect. Some of us actually fell in love. Real love, not programmed responses. Nathan studied the faces around the table. Executives who'd learned to feel. Women who'd discover their power. All of them angry. All of them ready to fight. The surveillance footage shows everything, Dr. Williams continued. Intimate moments, private conversations, emotional breakdowns. They've been building psychological profiles on male vulnerability patterns. For what purpose? Zariah asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. Corporate consulting. Teaching companies how to manipulate their employees' emotional states. Increasing productivity through manufactured relationships. They're selling our love stories as business strategies. The room fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the scratch of pens signing legal documents. Sarah spoke first. What's our move? Nathan's fingers found Zariah's under the table. We go public. All of us. Same day, same time. Coordinated media blitz. They'll fight back, Rebecca warned. My daughter's treatments. We've got coverage, Zariah said firmly. Nathan's setting up a medical fund for everyone affected. No one fights alone anymore. Dr. Williams pulled out another folder. There's more. Internal emails show they're expanding. College campuses next, targeting lonely students with fake study partners. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus stood up, pacing. My little sister's a freshman at ASU. My nephew just started at Georgia Tech, Sarah added, voice shaking. Nathan felt that familiar ice-cold calculation mode clicking into place. But this time, it wasn't protecting him. It was protecting people he cared about. They made one crucial mistake, he said quietly. They taught us what real connection looks like. Now we know the difference between manufactured feelings and authentic love. Zariah squeezed his hand, and we know how to fight for it. As the meeting concluded with battle plans and legal strategies, Nathan's phone buzzed with a text that made his stomach clench. Zariah's grandmother admitted to ER. Heart episode. Come alone or she doesn't get treatment. He showed Zariah the message. Her face went pale, then hard as stone. They just declared war on the wrong family, she whispered. Have you ever realized you weren't fighting just for yourself anymore, but for everyone who came after you? When as protecting others, given you strength you didn't know you had. Drop your thoughts below. They threatened the woman who taught him to love and the grandmother who taught her to fight. And in that moment, corporate executives learned what happens when you corner two people who've already lost everything once. The hospital corridor stretched like a tunnel of fluorescent nightmares. Nathan's hand gripped Zariah's as they walked toward the cardiac unit, both knowing this wasn't coincidence. Empathy Solutions Incorporated had friends in medical billing departments. Mrs. Johnson's insurance claim was mysteriously denied this morning, Dr. Peterson explained, his face grim. Someone flagged her account as high-risk fraud. But don't worry, Mr. Bellamy's already handled the financial arrangements. Zariah's grandmother lay connected to monitors, but her eyes blazed with the same fire that lived in her granddaughter. Baby girl, she whispered when Zariah approached. Don't you let them scare you into backing down. Grandma, you need to rest. Rest nothing. I didn't survive 60 years in the South to let some corporate boys in suits intimidate my family. Her weathered hand reached for Nathan's. You better fight for her, son. Fight like your life depends on it. Yes, ma'am, Nathan replied, and meant every word. Dr. Williams burst through the door with legal documents. We got them. FBI raid happened 20 minutes ago. Empathy Solutions Incorporated offices in 12 cities. Simultaneous takedown. Nathan's phone rang. His corporate lawyer. Nathan, it's over. SEC found everything. Stock manipulation, psychological experimentation without consent, medical insurance fraud. The CEO's been arrested. But Nathan was watching Zariah hold her grandmother's hand, whispering prayers in languages that predated corporate boardrooms and surveillance cameras. This woman had taught him that strength wasn't about building walls. It was about choosing what to protect behind them. There's something else, Dr. Williams said, lowering her voice. The FBI found recordings of executives laughing about your relationship, calling Zariah perfectly programmed and you predictably isolated. They bet money on how long it would take you to fall. Nathan felt ice form in his veins, but not the old protective kind. This was different, colder, more dangerous. How much did they bet? He asked quietly. $50,000. Winner take all. Zariah looked up from her grandmother's bedside. What did they win? Nothing, Nathan said, pulling out his phone. But we're about to. He dialed his financial advisor. Transfer $50 million to the Empathy Survivors Fund. Then buy every outstanding share of Empathy Solutions stock before the bankruptcy announcement hits the news. Zariah's eyes widened. Nathan, they bet $50,000 on our pain. We're betting $50 million on our healing. By evening, the news broke nationwide. Empathy Solutions Incorporated stock price collapsed to pennies. Nathan's investment firm bought the company for pocket change, then immediately donated it to a victims' rights organization. The executives who'd laughed at surveillance footage of intimate moments found themselves unemployed, facing federal charges, and owing millions in damages to the people they'd manipulated. But Nathan wasn't thinking about revenge as he sat beside Zariah in the hospital chapel, their hands intertwined while her grandmother slept peacefully down the hall. He was thinking about how prayer felt different when you had someone to pray with. We won, Zariah whispered. We survived, Nathan corrected. Now we get to live. When her grandmother woke up the next morning, her first words were, "Did you show them what Johnson women are made of?" "Yes, ma'am," Zariah replied, tears streaming down her face. "We show them what love is made of too." What's the moment you realize someone would literally fight the whole world for you? Share your protection story in the comments below. He'd spent years believing he was unworthy of love, until the day he knelt in a hospital room and asked a church girl to teach him about forever. 2 weeks later, Zariah's grandmother was home and bossy as ever, rearranging Nathan's perfectly organized kitchen while he pretended to be annoyed. But when she pulled him aside that Tuesday morning, her expression was serious. "Boy, what you waiting for?" "Ma'am, don't ma'am me. That girl loves you enough to fight corporate America. You love her enough to bankrupt a company. Y'all been through hell together. So what you waiting for?" Nathan's hand instinctively moved to his jacket pocket, where a small velvet box had lived for 3 weeks. "I wanted to wait until everything's settled. Child, if you wait for life to settle, you'll be waiting forever. Love don't need perfect timing. It just needs truth." That afternoon, Nathan found Zariah in the garden behind his mansion, reading legal documents about their new foundation. Sunlight caught her hair like gold thread, and she looked up when his shadow fell across her papers. "We got the final settlement amount," she said, waving the documents. 47 couples, $12 million in damages. Every victim gets their medical bills covered for life. "That's good," Nathan said, but his voice sounded strange. Zariah set down the papers. "What's wrong?" Nathan knelt in the grass beside her chair, pulling out the ring box with trembling hands. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's finally right." Her breath caught. "Nathan, I know this isn't fancy. I know you probably pictured something different, but I can't wait for perfect anymore. I love you, Zariah. Not because some company put you in my path. Not because you saved me from myself. I love you because when I look at you, I see home." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You see home?" "I see Sunday mornings and Thursday arguments, and 20 years from now, when you're still making me laugh at inappropriate times. I see children who look like you and patience you'll need to teach me, and growing old with someone who makes me want to be better every single day." He opened the box. The ring caught sunlight and threw rainbows across her dark skin. "Zariah Johnson, will you marry me?" She was quiet for so long that Nathan's heart started hammering against his ribs. Then she slid off the chair and knelt in the grass beside him, cupping his face in her hands. Yes, Nathan Bellamy. Yes to Sunday mornings and Thursday fights and growing old together. Yes to everything. When he slipped the ring on her finger, it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. That evening, they called her grandmother with the news. Her whoop of joy was so loud that Nathan had to hold the phone away from his ear. "About time," she hollered. I was starting to think that boy was slower than molasses in January. 2 days later, Nathan surprised Zariah with something better than any fancy wedding venue. He'd bought the community center where she'd volunteered before taking the job with him. The place where she'd fed hungry families and tutored kids and demonstrated the kind of love that wasn't manufactured or monitored. "This is where you want to get married?" she asked, walking through the familiar space. "This is where you learn to love people before you learn to love me. Seems like sacred ground." She kissed him right there in the middle of the empty hall, and Nathan realized something that took his breath away. He wasn't the Ice King anymore. He was just a man who'd learned that the warmest place on earth was wherever Zariah smiled. What makes a proposal perfect? The location, the ring, or the certainty that you've found your person? Tell me about your ideal commitment moment in the comments. They'd been used as experiments in empathy, but now they were about to become teachers of it. And the first lesson would be taught to 2 children who needed to learn that love wasn't a luxury, but a right. The Atlanta Children's Services building looked nothing like Nathan had expected. No marble floors or corporate intimidation tactics. Just worn carpet and crayon drawings taped to beige walls. The kind of place where hope lived in filing cabinets and social workers' hearts. The Martinez children, caseworker Mrs. Thompson explained, leading them down a hallway that smelled like disinfectant and possibility. Maria's 8, Carlos is 5. Their parents were involved in a similar corporate manipulation case in Houston. When it fell apart, the family imploded. Zariah's hand tightened on Nathan's. They'd been married for 6 months, but this felt bigger than their wedding day. More terrifying, more important. Maria's been taking care of Carlos since they entered the system. Smart as a whip, but doesn't trust adults. Carlos has attachment issues. Neither child has had stable placement because they refuse to be separated. Nathan understood that completely. He'd spent 30 years refusing to attach to anyone. The playroom door opened, and Nathan's heart stopped. A little girl with serious dark eyes sat reading to a smaller boy who clutched a worn stuffed elephant. She looked up when they entered, immediately positioning herself between the adults and her brother. Zariah knelt down slowly. Maria, I'm Zariah. I know who you are, Maria said, voice older than her years. Mrs. Thompson told us, you're the people who fight companies that hurt families. That's right. Carlos peeked around his sister. Are you going to take Maria away? Never, Nathan said, sitting cross-legged on the floor. We don't separate families. We make them bigger. Something flickered in Maria's eyes. Not trust yet, but the possibility of it. Over the next hour, they learned that Maria helped Carlos with nightmares, that Carlos made Maria laugh when she got too serious, that both children had survived by becoming each other's whole world. They remind me of someone, Zariah whispered to Nathan as they watched the kids share a snack. Yeah, Nathan replied. They remind me of us. The home study process took 3 months. Social workers toured Nathan's mansion, interviewed neighbors, ran background checks that went back to elementary school. But the real test came on a Tuesday afternoon when Maria had a panic attack at school. Nathan left a board meeting mid-sentence to pick her up, found her hiding under the nurse's desk, hyperventilating and asking for Carlos. Hey, Nathan said quietly, crouching down. I get scared sometimes too. You do not. You're grown up. Grown-ups get scared too. Want to know what scares me most? Maria nodded. Losing people I love. That's why I understand why you take care of Carlos. Someone has to protect the people who matter. You won't make us live with different families? Never. Carlos needs his big sister. You need your little brother, Zariah, and I need both of you. That night, Maria asked if she could call him Dad. Nathan cried in the shower for 20 minutes. The adoption was finalized on a Thursday morning in family court. Judge Martinez, no relation to the children, but she smiled when she noticed the coincidence. Asked if they understood they were taking responsibility for 2 children who'd already survived trauma. Your Honor, Nathan said, these children are taking responsibility for 2 adults who'd never learned what family looked like. We're all teaching each other. Walking out of the courthouse with 2 kids holding their hands felt like winning every corporate battle he'd ever fought, multiplied by infinity. That evening, Maria helped Zariah cook dinner while Carlos helped Nathan with emails by pressing random keys on a laptop. The kitchen filled with laughter and flour dust, and the kind of chaos Nathan had never known he was missing. Dad, Carlos said suddenly, are you rich? Why do you ask, buddy? Because Mrs. Thompson said rich people don't usually want kids like us. Nathan put down his laptop and looked at both children seriously. You know what makes someone really rich? Having people who love you no matter what. By that measure, I'm the richest man alive. One has love multiplied instead of divided when shared. Share your chosen family story in the comments below. 5 years ago, he posted an ad for a cook and accidentally found his soul. Today, he stood in a kitchen full of laughter, watching the woman who melted his heart teach their children that love is the most important ingredient. Sunday morning sunlight streamed through kitchen windows as 8-year-old Carlos tried to flip pancakes, while 13-year-old Maria supervised from her perch on the counter. Zariah moved between them like a conductor orchestrating chaos, flour in her hair and joy on her face. Nathan pretended to read stock reports on his laptop, but really he was watching his family create the kind of memories he'd never imagined possible. Dad, your pancake looks like a blob, Carlos announced, holding up something that might have been food if you squinted. That's abstract art, son. Very sophisticated. It's a mess, Maria corrected, but she was grinning. All the best art is messy, Zariah said, kissing Nathan's cheek as she passed. Right, honey? Absolutely, Nathan agreed, pulling her down for a real kiss that made both kids groan dramatically. 5 years. 5 years since Zariah had walked into his sterile mansion and turned it into a home. 5 years since corporate executives had tried to use their love as a weapon and discovered they created something unbreakable instead. The Empathy Survivors Foundation now helped 50 families annually. Nathan's tech company pioneered ethical AI research. Zariah's cookbook about healing through food hit bestseller lists. Maria wanted to be a lawyer to fight bad companies like you and Mom did. Carlos wanted to be a chef, but only for people I love. Remember when you couldn't even toast bread? Zariah teased, watching Nathan actually flip a pancake successfully. I remember thinking my kitchen was just for show, Nathan replied. Now I can't imagine it without pancake batter on the ceiling. That was Carlos last week, Maria pointed out. Hey, that was an accident. Nathan's phone buzzed with a news alert. The final Empathy Solutions executive had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Justice finally complete. But Nathan wasn't thinking about corporate justice as he watched Carlos teach their golden retriever to catch pancake scraps. He was thinking about how love had turned out to be nothing like he'd expected and everything he'd never known he needed. What are you smiling about? Zariah asked, leaning against his shoulder. Just thinking about that classified ad I posted. The one that said, no prior culinary training required? Yeah, I thought I was hiring a cook. Turns out I was applying for a family. After breakfast dishes were done and kids were occupied with Sunday cartoons, Nathan pulled Zariah into the same kitchen where everything had started. The morning news played on the tablet. Another story about their foundation helping abuse survivors find justice. Any regrets? He asked, wrapping his arms around her waist. About what? Answering a sketchy job posting from a weird recluse billionaire. Zariah pretended to consider this seriously. Well, the pay was terrible. The boss was emotionally unavailable. The working conditions were bizarre. Ouch. But she continued, standing on her toes to kiss him. The benefits package turned out to be amazing. Full medical coverage, lifetime job security, and a retirement plan that includes grandchildren and rocking chairs. Don't forget the stock options. What stock options? Nathan grinned, pulling her closer. You own 50% of my heart. Market value keeps going up. That's the cheesiest thing you've ever said. Wait until you hear what I tell the kids about compound interest on love. They were interrupted by Carlos running into the kitchen. Mom, Dad, Maria's teaching me to play chess, and she says I'm not hopeless. High praise from your sister, Nathan observed. Can we have a chess tournament? Family championship? Absolutely, Zariah said. But I should warn you, your dad's pretty competitive. I learn from the best, Nathan replied, watching his son's face light up with excitement. Later that evening, after chess games and movie nights and bedtime stories, Nathan found himself back in his home office. Not working this time, just looking at the photos that covered his desk. Wedding pictures, adoption day, first day of school, Christmas mornings, beach vacations. The visual timeline of life he'd never planned but couldn't imagine without. Zariah appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of tea. Still think you answered the wrong ad? He asked, pulling her into his lap. No, she said, settling against his chest. I think the ad found exactly who it was looking for. Outside, Atlanta glittered like scattered diamonds. Inside, their children slept safely in beds surrounded by love that no corporation could manufacture or surveillance could breach. The Ice King was gone, melted away completely, leaving behind a man who knew that the warmest place in any house is wherever your family gathers. So what would you do if someone saw your heart before you knew you had one? Would you let them teach you how to love? Would you fight the whole world to protect what they showed you? Hit that like button if this story reminded you that the best love stories aren't about rescue. They're about recognition. Subscribe for more stories that prove love can transform anyone, and comment below with the moment you realize someone had changed your life forever. Remember, sometimes the wrong ad leads to exactly the right life.